So hello, everybody. This is another episode here with Sex Talks with Diana, and we're here today with Rachel Music. She is a writer. She is also the founder of Schadenfrau Studio, and she is as well a former sex worker. So we're going to be talking a little bit about sex work and a little bit also about what she's doing in the studio. So thank you so much for being here, Rachel. How are you today?
I'm doing all right, Diana. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Well, I was thinking I wanted to kick off this conversation by asking the question, um, if you were to give advice to a person who is thinking on becoming a sex worker, what what's your advice for them? Because when you want to become a teacher, a doctor, whatever, you can look it up. You have a lot of information around, but what about sex work?
I think that is a brilliant first question. It is there. I have spent the better part of the last decade trying to figure out what I would have told myself at 20 when I got into sex work. So that was about how old I was. I'll paint the scene for you. It was 2011, 2012. I was in college. I was married. And my husband quit his job, and I basically found out that there was a way that I could make enough money for the both of us while keeping up with college. And it was kind of a lark. I have always been a writer. I've always been a storyteller, and I was at college for a performance major. So to me, I went into sex work as a very impulsive kind of, I will get stories out of this. I'm a good actor. I can pretend to be mean to people. And that is generally the only vantage point I had. I understood innately as a human being, that BDSM was a part of my life. It was a lifestyle that I understood, and because I understood what I wanted, I had a feeling that I could figure out, I'll know what these clients want because it's what I want. So I went about topping in kind of a reverse engineering way, but sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. However, one thing that nobody would tell you, and something that I would tell anybody looking to get into this kind of work, is that it can be incredibly rewarding. It can be incredibly financially profitable for you. It can be a lucrative business. But nobody ever tells you to go in with it on your, I want to figure out the best way to say this because I do not want to misrepresent this point because it's kind of important. It's not kind of, it's very important. If you don't go into a room or a date or an escort situation or a sugar daddy interview, any of these things, if you don't pick up the phone or turn on a live stream without your boundaries intact, and without having a confident sense of what your hard limits are and the understanding of a transactional atmosphere, then you will very likely find yourself either violating those boundaries or compromising those boundaries, or you will put yourself in a position where you're more emotionally vulnerable than perhaps you need to be. So if I can unpack that a little bit, because I realize I talked in a giant circle to get to kind of a pretty simple point. And I'm sorry, that's just the nature how my brain works. I have to go around my elbow to get to my ass.
That's funny.
So I was a 20-year-old person and I had no idea what I was doing. And I was thrust into this dungeon scenario where you are told something pretty simple. And on paper, it makes sense to you. I go in the room, the person tells me how he wants me to behave, and then I behave accordingly. That seems pretty simple. But you're dealing with individuals who are looking, gosh, this is going to turn into a novel. Suffice it to say, because there are like so many side stories that I could take this to, and I don't know if that's necessarily always where you want, because there's a lot of ground to cover. All I'm saying is I would be a much better dominatrix now at 30 than I was at 20, because when you're 20, at least when you were me, it is very tempting. And it is very tempting in my experience with young women who may find themselves drawn towards sex work. that they are very attention seeking. And I do not mean that in a you're crying for attention. I mean, there is a desire to make people's lives better. Most of the sex workers that I've met, they tend to be empathetic individuals. They are mediators. They are caretakers. There is something about them that allows them to be generous with their bodies and their time and their intimacy. This is not something that is just trivial and can be thrown away. There's a lot of emotional labor that goes into being somebody's fantasy for an hour. And it's so easy on the outside to dismiss it as, here's an attractive person who makes money hand over fist for something that anyone could do. And I just want to challenge that perception, because when it is your job and you're doing it, like I was sometimes 25, 30 hours a week, you are equal parts a personal assistant that needs to look at their penis and
Of course.
and also a therapist who needs to accept the really truest and rawest versions of themselves. And I had clients who were their best selves with me, and I had clients who decide that they can be their worst self with you. And I think that the nature of money changing hands affects everybody differently. Now, I've also worked with people who completely had boundaries intact, and they were able to walk in on the job, whip somebody with a single tail, walk out, change clothes and go get rooftop margaritas. And that's incredible. And if you have that sensibility and you have that confidence, then go stack that cheddar, because you'll do well in this business. But if, as I have found, you're somebody who craves human connection, and that maybe leads you into a line of work where you can use that, it is an asset, but it is an asset that can be turned against you, or you can burn out a lot. I've seen a lot of young women get burnt out from being emotionally open and being intimate with people. And if you don't take the time to self-care and recharge, whether that is knowing you have to take 3 days off, you only can work XYZ amount of times, you need vacations. If you can't go into something treating it like a job that needs to be recovered from, then the shelf life you'll run into you're going to have a bad time. So that would be that is the very long version of the advice that I would give anyone getting into the business. It's weirdly the same advice I would give somebody if they were going to get married, or if they were going to move to a different country. It is the exact same kind of thing, is that know yourself, know what you want to get out of it, know what you will not accept, and remain steadfast in that. And once it's there, you just job in. Are there also dicks in the room? Like, it's just
yeah, it becomes just a matter of, I guess surfing through what the options are, because I think the sex work industry is probably way bigger than people tend to actually picture it, And then we were talking to Caritia, you might or might not be familiar with her, and she mentioned that as well. She mentioned how sex work ends up being a way to allow space, to hold space for people to explore themselves. And it was a very beautiful thing she said, because she was also saying, like, when people lack this spaces outside of sex work, because probably sex education at school and even later on, like, that is just one aspect in which people could have actually explore themselves a little bit and know what things are regarding sex and sexuality. But then sex work, as she was putting it, sex work becomes this like space where, okay, you come here and you explore it, since you probably didn't even have the moment to do it before. And this would be probably from the perspective of a client, right? That they come here and then they just, and as you mentioned, the part of how emotional it could be, because she was saying precisely that, and how people sometimes they were maybe into the BDSM world, but they had a bad experience, but they want to come back to it. So like, it's difficult, because, and I can't imagine that. How is it to like, because when I can what I think is that when people are into BDSM, this becomes a very also emotional part of you in a very specific way. And like I think losing that has to be very difficult to navigate. Like it's like you miss a part of your sexual self that you're not enjoying thanks to something that happened to you. And then here's when sex work can come in.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic, and I'm glad that they made that point. I would say that I have. Oh man, there are so many sessions that I've had that I have run the gamut from feeling overjoyed that someone was cognizant enough to say, I am very happy to have. You have clients who have different degrees of self-awareness. And I had a client who was very intelligent and really, really smart man. And oh no, that's my dog. She's fine. She's fine. He sat me down and he goes, I knew when I met you that you were the provider I wanted to see, because you're clearly not only very intelligent, you're very empathetic. And I don't want somebody to come in and play a role for me. I want someone to interact with me as a person. And not every sex worker does that. And that's a totally fine choice. I find it much easier to be myself around clients. And conversely, that would get me in trouble when I was 20, because you think this is going really well. I'm going to open up and tell them my real name, or I'm going to tell them that I'm married because the session's over. And then suddenly something snaps. But I found it much more difficult to come into a room and be a tyrannical asshole. I can't be mean. I unfortunately am like too corn-fed, red-blooded Pennsylvanian to be mean to people. But the therapeutic aspect is really, really enjoyable when you can yield it. But I want to touch on what you said about trauma, because you didn't use that word, but that's a great deal of what BDSM is. And if I have a pet cause, it is reframing BDSM culturally and societally, because I get really, really upset when I see these tropes of either submissive women are just women with daddy issues, or anyone who is a dominant is secretly abusive and has found a way to sanction their behavior, or lifestyle BDSM people are secretly codependent on one another. And all of these things are just kind of taken for granted. And if it's not one of those, then it's a joke. It's a woman in a latex cat suit, and it's the buddy, it's the college comedy, and it's very funny, but it's no longer 2001. And so part of starting Schadenfrau Studio was so that I could make this proof of concept for a workplace comedy that I had written about. What if there's a workplace comedy where the workplace is a dungeon? Because it was my workplace and it was very funny. So why not have that? So that was part of what made me want to write the show that I did and create the film that I did as a proof of concept, because the most valuable experiences that I had at the dungeon were moments where I had clients who were truly they were either going through something, a catharsis they didn't know that they had to process, or they were healing something in session. And sorry, she's a little mouthy. So for example, I had a client who came in and he wanted to do a cross-dressing session. And I had not really done one of these before, but I was very curious. He picked me out of the lineup, and we hit it off. And it was originally supposed to be a very sort of superficial session. He comes in saying, I want you to dress me up as a girl and then tease me, and then I would like you to help me change back into my boy clothes. And is it okay if you're not mean to me? And I was really struck by the way he said that is it okay if you're not mean to me? And I am a bit of a scientist at heart, even though I didn't pursue it. And I wanted to dig into that. So I started talking, and as he opened up a little bit. He says, well, I had a sister, and he didn't really want to talk more about it. So we dressed him up, and I was not as mean as I could have been. I just ended up kind of going off script and telling him how pretty he looked and how happy I was that he came to see me, and could he do a little dance? And something happens and he starts crying. And, I he didn't say a word, but I put a timeout on the scene, and I helped him back into his boy clothes. And I just sat with him and talked with him for a while, person to person. And he's like, I have never understood why I wanted to cross dress. I just thought it was a kinky thing. And I said, can you tell me a little bit about your sister? And he says, well, my sister was my mom's favorite. And my mom always showered her with attention. And I was very much ignored. And I was like, honey, I think we figured out why you want to cross dress. And it was just this lovely thing where I'm going, you've come into me, and I was honored because they don't know it, but it's a beautiful thing to be a part of watching someone realize that about themselves. And you go, see, this isn't, and even if it were a totally surface level kink, that's also amazing. Go for it. But to understand that there's a bedrock underneath it, there's a little boy in this room with me whose mom ignored him. And how can I, a decade or 2 decades, a generation later, help heal that? And there were days like that really made the job wonderful. And if I can have one more tangent, because I'm so sorry, I'm doing all of the talking.
Oh, go ahead. This is beautiful.
Oh, good. Because God bless that dog. You mentioned losing a part of yourself. And I really would like to speak to that, because there was a point where I needed to stop working at the dungeon. And it was because I was assaulted on the job. And there was a period of time where I truly felt like I've been a submissive ever since I knew that it was interesting to get tied up, which, let's be honest, was the first time I saw Aladdin. I was like, okay. As soon as I was little, I knew ooh, I want to get kidnapped. That's how I said it in my brain. It was I want to get kidnapped. Mm-hmm. But you don't know what that means until you're 15, 16 or however old I was. And when on the job, you have something that is in your mind, a very crucial part of your personality. Something that's not just, sure, it's what gets me off, but when you think about how important sex is and how important companionship is and intimacy is, what gets you off is not a trivial detail at all. It's huge. And when I not only had spent over a year of my life sort of role-playing it within something that I did in earnest, that gets a little blurry in your head, where you go, oh, I thought I would save this for my husband, and now I'm using this terminology with someone who's giving me money. And it feels a little icky because you're unused to it. And then to have to leave that line of work because somebody totally just took advantage of that dynamic and decided in the middle of a session that he was a switch. And you get some real, it's just, I mourned for a while thinking this is a whole part of my life that's been sullied and I can't get it back. But you do. The answer is you can. You go to therapy, or you have a wonderful partner, in which case I did both. I have a wonderful, I got a dog. That helped, even if she interrupts all of my interviews. So that is very real. It's a very real risk that sex workers could take, especially if BDSM is something that they have an emotional attachment to, instead of just somebody who, business-minded, could go, I am not into whips and chains at all, but I understand that if I get good at it, I will make money hand over fist. And that's a wonderful way to do it. And as someone who is now incredibly pro-boundary, that may be a better thing to do for you, to take something that is not part of your sexual biography, and not to to try and monetize it. It's the same way that you would tell somebody who crochets in their spare time and it's their source of sanity. When that person says, maybe I'll start an Etsy store, you go, no, 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 then you won't love it anymore. There's a little
Right.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's your job and your hobby. And
Exactly.
there was a period of time where BDSM was my jobby. And it's just it's a little sketchy. Keep those things sacred.
Totally.
I think it's important.
We should rewrite. We're rewriting the dictionary, everybody. Okay.
Jobby.
But I think that's an interesting point. Because also, I think it happens, and it happens as you mentioned earlier, like in all aspects of life. Like it just happens. And then there is this fine line between you wanting to do something you enjoy, and also like maybe working at the same time at that, but then how that becomes this whole responsibility. And I think when it comes to sex work, sadly, there are just a lot more risks that you're taking by putting your vulnerability and your true self out there on the line.
I will say that some of the sex workers I know with the longest tenures are now queer. Or I don't want to say now because I don't know how they identified when perhaps before I knew them, but they were individuals who now only who sleep with women, and that is, I think, as clear as you get in terms of isolating what you'll do for your job and what makes you happy. It's more of an anecdote, but I think it speaks to that same idea.
I think so. And there was another thing, because I think you also talked about, and I don't know if this is relevant for the conversation, but I don't know how to address this without actually, because there is this whole, of course, sex work has a lot of stigma around it, right? But then this part of having this risk, there,
Mm-hmm.
because when you, and I think that's something that you've mentioned it, I think briefly, but I think I like us to talk a little bit more about that. Someone who's thinking of getting into sex work, they are putting themselves at certain risks that you're not usually going to put yourself at any other job, especially because of the stigma, and especially because of the legal situation of sex work around the world. So I don't know, like, what would you tell these people about that?
I would tell them to do as I say and not as I did. At the time, I was 22 years old and divorced. So sex work didn't help my marriage. It didn't. Now, granted, my marriage was flawed before getting into sex work, but I would say that it certainly eroded more trust in the relationship, and my own dissatisfaction started coming through because I was suddenly making more money and meeting more people. And there's also an intoxicating idea that every time you walk into your office, people find you attractive. So it's very easy to suddenly take somebody for granted because you go, ha, I'm hot shit. Everyone at work thinks I'm very beautiful and they give me money. And it's very easy to suddenly undervalue your partner. And I did that in a very short-sighted 22-year-old way. But to actually I'll say don't do what I did, because there are plenty of ways that you can mitigate the risks and not be where I was, which is I accepted a job after only meeting a client one time, and I accepted a long distance out call and did not vet this client with other providers. I did not seek any references from them. And you can do everything right. You can tell somebody where you're going to be. You can set up a safe word. You can think you'll know how a scene is going to go, and you can still get raped and need your rapist to drive you to the train station and then pay you because he had agreed to pay you for your time. And then this is an unusual situation. This isn't something. It's not similar to like a date rape or an assault, where somebody jumps out of the bushes at you. Inherently, there is so much. I remember riding this train, this 3-hour train ride back to New York City where I was, and pulling the stigma out of the air. Suddenly everything that I had said about, no, I'm an independent person who is, just exercising my right as a consenting adult, and this is the way that I make my money, to all of a sudden you soak in, no, what happened to me was because I'm a sex worker and I fucked up at some point, if I can say that, and I messed up at some point, and that is why this has happened. Or you even have the thought of, well, I guess I'm a full service sex worker now, but I didn't make that decision. And that's a really tricky thing to navigate, because at the end of the day, you still take the money. It was just all being said. And suffice it to say, I did not report. What happened. I just really fell apart for a few weeks, and luckily, after a long time, was able to pull myself out of it. But I would say, do not do what I do. And there are ways to mitigate and make sure things like that do not happen. There are sites that exist. Fosta Sesta has made it very, very difficult for these things to exist. And I hope that could be a transition for us to talk about Fosta Sesta, because there should be safeguards in place that protect human beings. And everyone can agree with that sentiment. But as soon as you say there should be ways to keep sex workers from falling prey to rapists by being able to give references to one another, and that falls under, no, that site should not exist, because it potentially has an ancillary connection to a website that has had a tiny amount of posts connected to child trafficking, which is also something that nobody likes. But that is the sneaky, insidious part of Fosta Sesta, because once you put something under the banner of, well, y'all hate pedophiles, don't you? Because everyone hates pedophiles. Nobody wants children to be trafficked for sex. This is a horrible thing. But you can sneak so much underneath that bill. And that is what happened. And it prevents, business women and businessmen and business people. It prevents individuals who are just trying to make a living and survive from being as safe as they possibly can. The only reason that what happened to me is because the dungeon no longer made money, and I needed to outsource. Like it was safe in the dungeon because we had a security guy. We had, we had their driver's license. So if anything happens, we're going to call the police. And you don't have that when you are meeting strangers from Twitter or fielding calls off of Backpage. And I'm not saying that Backpage was a wonderful thing. It's clearly not, but it served a purpose. And the problem is everything that got swept up into that witch hunt. So yes. To you, over to you, Diana.
Well, yeah, that was a lot. I actually wanted to ask you, but I guess we can just talk about this and then come back to Fosta Sesta a little bit.
Oh, totally.
If you're okay with that, I would like to ask you, why did you not report what happened?
I felt a tremendous amount of guilt and shame, not necessarily because I had it was mostly in terms of, I felt like I had been so suckered. I felt like I had been so stupid, and I felt taken advantage of, and it really, I found it laughable. And it's very, very interesting to hear 8 years later, be able to tell you very matter-of-factly what happened. And at the time, you go, how in the world could you have, this being, the voice in your head that everyone has, that, is terrible thing.
That annoying bitch.
That horrible, annoying bitch that for some reason sounds like my mom. But just because, like,
No.
how could you should be smarter than this. You should have known X, Y, Z. Why would you trust somebody? All these things. And it takes a very long time to reframe that narrative and go, it is still a good thing that I'm a trusting person. And it is still a good thing that I'm a generous person. That has nothing to do with the fact that there was a terrible person and I was stuck in a room with him. And so it was also a bit of a tricky situation where it was not agreed upon that there would be any sex during this session. It was absolutely presented as, I am renting out a dungeon for a few hours and, we're going to play together and I'll top you and you'll top me and we're both switches and it'll be fun. And it's very easy to say that. And then you're tied up and there's a box cutter. And the guy's like, guess what? This is what we're going to do now. And it's part of the fantasy. And there's a very strange realization where I blanked out. I suddenly did not know my own safe word. And nothing, I'll make it funny. Because if it's not funny, then it's just real, which is Carrie Fisher quote. You have to, I love her. She says, you have to laugh because if it's not funny, then it's just true. Yeah, right. So there's an expression that it doesn't matter how you prepare, nothing will, everyone's got a plan until they got punched in the mouth. I think Mike Tyson says that. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And every sex worker has a plan until someone's got a box cutter. And then suddenly, wait, is this part of the fantasy? You didn't clear this with me. Are you really going to use that? What if I say something wrong? And on top of it, not even knowing the safe word, because your brain's just like, there's a knife. There's a knife. There's a knife. You're tied up and you can't do anything. This person's made it very clear what it is they want. And I mostly did not report because it was such a flurry of information. And there was a nagging, very nasty little voice in the back of my head that said, if you were really scared, you would have remembered your safe word. Or like if it was really something you didn't want, you would have found a way to get out of it. There must be some reason that it happened. And it's that's a really difficult thing to navigate. And you also understand that if you go in, there is a upstanding 54-year-old white guy who's like, I don't know what this woman's talking about. And it's very, very tricky to go, I don't know who he knows. I don't know what strings he can pull. It's my word against his. And if they even take me seriously, I was technically committing a crime. And that's
the worst part of everything.
And that's a huge part of I think why crimes get underreported. And it breaks my heart to be part of that statistic. So again, do what I say, not what I do.
But I think part of that is like, and I think I don't know how good of a thing to do it is, but I think it's helpful because I think we need to start reimagining our society in so many ways. But then in this case, like, I guess, what do you think needed to be different? Maybe not inside of you, because we already, you've shared with us the story. And I think in every single situation, people deal with these things,
Yeah.
But still, none of us should at some point just make it right, like something bad happened. It shouldn't be my fault. But then the question is like, what do you think was needed from the world around? What should have been different around you that would have changed that?
I don't think that it's a panacea and it will fix everything, but legalizing sex work and being able to provide the basic sort of, oh my gosh, these not utilities, benefits, the basic benefits that anybody who gets 25 hours a week at a job is able to get healthcare, and maybe there's a union, or there's just if you are legitimized as a business person and you are legitimized and seen as a human, and I think there is a huge issue with America with cementing your occupation with your identity, and also determining your legitimacy and your productivity by what it is that you do and how you contribute to society. And I think that's a really nasty way of looking at it sometimes, because that negates the idea of, well, don't artists bring joy, and don't, it doesn't matter that a preschool teacher may make $38,000 a year. They should make more than that. But that, is it better to change the life of one kindergarten class? Do you know what I mean? So if it were just a job that you could have that has its own esteem to it, oh, Joey's a plumber and Kristen is a senator and Rachel is a tug job artist. If baristas can be called latte artists, then I think that tug job artist should be a job description because there is a lot of nuance that goes into those things. And it's not just a rough and ready, one size fits all approach. And I say it to make it funny because I have to, and that's just my coping mechanism. But sex work needs to be viewed as work. And once you do that, we have workers' comp. If I went to work at an office and stepped into the building and slipped on the floor and cracked my head open, I'm entitled to money for protection because my job didn't protect me. You'd be able to do that. I would have been able to do that. I could have walked out of that room, gone to the head of that building and said, sound the alarms. You got a real head case back there. Please call the cops because this, and you can't do that. And I don't understand why we're lagging behind every.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It would make everyone so happy. Just look at weed. You can tax it. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so that'd be my answer. Just make it okay.
Yeah. I think that's part of, first of all, thank you for sharing the story with us, because I think those are difficult things to talk about. Even if you've talked about them over and over again, I don't think it ever gets just normal to talk about it. And that's part of why we're here, right? Because things need to change. And I think, because we've heard stories like your story is not the only one. As we were, getting informed about these things, there are many stories like that. And in fact, there are even stats, as you mentioned, usually when that happens within the world of sex work, there is nobody to go to and report what's going on. And on top of that, I think it's also very difficult how even, let's not talk about the government or legal institutions, let's talk about, society. And then you should be able to have some support in your friends, your family, whatever. But then as there is still so much stigma around sex work, even that becomes a thing where probably you don't even tell your family that you're doing it. And then that's a whole deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's both my parents knew because I didn't have the energy to keep it a secret from them. My mother was pretty all right with it when I told her how much money I was making, but then you visit her 9 months later and she has 2 glasses of wine and then she's just chain smoking outside. Like, what did I do wrong as a mother that this is your life? I'm like, I picked this. How dare you? So yeah, there's a weird, there's an unsettling stigma, and it's so frustrating because it's so hypocritical. And I think I like what you said about support systems, and I think it is a good way to ping back to Fosta Sesta, because the support systems end up happening at a grassroots level, and it's a very local level often. But the internet, by virtue of the fact that it's connected people, you have to. And I don't want to say it as if it's black and white, because there are sites where you can go, do not take XYZ client, they have a story like mine. But it runs the gamut. You can find out, oh yeah, this client, honestly, He'll just send you pictures of his dick all night and never book with you. He'll waste your time for 4 hours. That's important to know too. That's helpful. If we're able to have Angie's List and leave reviews on our plumbers and there could be 700 Amazon reviews for a bullet journal, we should be able to know what we're getting into, because when there is, have you seen Sin City?
Yes.
Sin City? I just rewatched it, and it's going to sound like it's coming out of left field, but Old Town is the red light district of Sin City, and the cops don't come there.
Yeah.
And the whores of Old Town are their own law.
Yep.
That is how it worked before Fosta Sesta, is that we would look out for each other and we would be able to give references. And now that is kind of the only, I don't keep tabs on it as much as I used to, naturally, because I am no longer like balls deep in that world. But it used to be, if you're looking to book with me, I need a picture of your ID. I need some kind of collateral. I need to figure out who you are. Or I would prefer to hear from a provider who's seen you before. But when times get tough, and I'm sure COVID exacerbated this, or when business gets tight, that is when those protections get lax. And that is when you realize you can't vet everyone. Or I remember when Fosta Sesta happened, the business ground to a screeching halt, and there was a mass exodus to Twitter. And I do not do social media very well, so I immediately was like, I'm more annoyed that I have to create posts on social media than I am about potentially like giving a guy an enema. That's less annoying than just the maintenance of Twitter. And I lost my train of thought there for a second.
You were talking about...
Oh, and business stopped. And suddenly that was about the time where I had to jump ship for good, because I was working full-time corporate. But not everyone I knew was so lucky. They didn't have that backup that they could run to. And a lot of providers started slashing their rates. A lot of providers started avoiding vetting or whatever they could to just, because once Backpage went down, the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of horny men didn't just disappear. They were panicking just as much as we were. And
okay,
it was the Wild West. Yeah. That was the final nail in the coffin for me to leave. It was about time for me, but Fosta Sesta really just, shot the horse. Broke the horse's leg and then shot the... There we go. There's a metaphor, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, but then it's because of what? So Fosta Sesta was really pretty much not the only reason, but it was kind of a part of why you left it.
It was a huge part of why I left it, because it was my second job. I had gone through a big breakup at the time, and again went from 2 incomes to 1, and I was like, well, wait a minute, what worked last time? And then was working full time as an executive assistant and 2 to 3 shifts a week at another institution. And when the money was good, it was good, and it was worth it. It was fine. But when you're spending, an extra 18 hours of your life, and there is no money, and you have to, crank out ads, I have to. Do not get it twisted. I am not thanking Fosta Sesta for this. No, in no way. But it was realizing that I was not going to make any more money without seriously retooling or relearning the internet in a way that I was not prepared to do, that led me to go, something needs to fulfill me, because clearly my job is not doing it, and now my side hustle is not doing it. And it is what led me to eventually just take the plunge and start a production company. But that's only because it's the unmet need that motivates. I think that it would have happened eventually on its own. But yeah, it completely cut off the money making head of the snake, for me at least, for a little while, and I was not nimble enough to adapt.
I think that's interesting because usually when we talk about foster sister, we talk about, how it affects everybody right now, and the pages, the posts, the things that just are not allowed anymore and that just get taken down and everything. But I think um is like what keeps happening right now, like how, for example, farmers and people who have always worked a certain way, right now they have to rethink the whole thing. And then I think, I don't know if you know of any stories, because as you've mentioned, you had these sort of jobs. You could easily just say, you know what, I'm getting out. But probably a lot of other people did not have that possibility.
They didn't, and that's why I understand that I was really blessed to have that other job at that time. And frankly, after having gone through the first attack and pulled myself up by my bootstraps enough, you know what? Take that. I'm not even going to use that expression because it's been co-opted by a bunch of assholes. So I have managed to be resilient and claw my way back into a better mindset. And when I hit that hurdle, Fosta Sesta, it was just insurmountable. I went, you know what? I overcame something really terrible and traumatizing. This is a totally different level, and it was just annoying. And it sounds very petty to go, it was worse than a rape. And I'm not saying that administrative annoyance is worse than a rape. In no way am I saying that. But after having overcome that, I went, no, I do not think that this is worth, the juice is not worth the squeeze. And I had to take my leave of it. But I did know people who really suffered because that was their only source of income. And like I said, people got hurt or people went without. It just breaks my heart. It's similar, in a way, it's very similar to all the creative people that I knew, or all the gig-based people I knew, or the freelancers I knew during COVID. And I mean, I'm sure you have your own reference. Just suddenly imagine that. And I think that might be a way to spin it, is I think that everybody knows, Jackie has whatever Jackie did, and now Jackie can't do it because of COVID. But if half of your friends are sex workers, I went through that of, wait a minute, we were basically grounded and cut off from not being able to go in the office, essentially. Mm-hmm. That's funny because I actually hadn't thought of the parallel until just now. But yeah, so it was the last real straw for me because I couldn't go through something else that was, I needed to move forward because there was just a place where the hustle and sex work as a grind and what I had come to understand it as, and the boundaries and the way that I had built up myself into it again, was no longer serving me. And I moved on because I wanted to write about sex work and I wanted to bring cultural awareness to sex work. And I felt that I could do a lot better. And I would be a lot happier doing that. So that's why I pivoted.
That's interesting. Because that's also important, as visibility and like telling the stories. I think there is a lot of power in stories and in hearing what people is going through. Because I think that's also what tends to happen in general terms with every single bad thing that's happening right now in the world. It's like we don't take the time to hear the stories and feel the tiniest bit of empathy for what's going on with people. And no. I think, and Fosta Sesta is an example of how, like, laws should be there to actually, help people and to make things better. But then it just becomes a whole different thing. Same with abortion, for example. people who just, like, no, you shouldn't, you're not allowed, you shouldn't be allowed. But these people can't even get pregnant, don't have, haven't heard how it is, like, the whole process of doing that. And then it's the same with sex work, and especially all the both good and bad things that happen. Because also, I think that's also important. We usually talk about this in terms of all the risks and all the bad things that happen, and how, legalizing it could protect everybody and make things better. um, but it's not only about that. I think it's also about just making it okay to explore your sexuality, making it okay for people to actually be, because you become the experts on this, as you were mentioning a moment ago with the example of the guy who wanted to cross dress. um, in a way, you should, I'm just thinking here, just had this thought that you should even probably get like support as to how to navigate those things with these people, some sort of like psychological support, as like, if you see this in this person, probably this is how you should handle it, because you're getting vulnerable, deep vulnerable with somebody. And you're also allowing that space, as Karcha was mentioning, for people to sometimes heal and sometimes actually
Yeah.
know themselves better, because there are no other spaces for that.
I think you're right. It's funny, as you're talking, I am imagining a job that does not exist yet, but a job where, like, say there's a cat house, a brothel, a dungeon, whatever you want to call it. I would be like the HR manager of that place. And I would be the person where, like, once every 2 weeks, I see all the sex workers and I go, all right, how have you been? How are your clients? Oh, is that what I would love to sort of be the den mother of, are you sleeping enough? You look like you could use some sleep, honey. Hey, Chrissy, just watch out for Thomas. He's got a couple weird viewpoints. We had a client named Nazi Thomas, and as you can imagine, he had some. That's literally what we called him. He did not mind. That's also bad.
Probably.
Yeah, literally nobody would see him but me. And we charged him extra. We charged him an asshole tax.
That's great.
I was the only provider who would do it. So it's funny that you feel like there would be, when you say psychological support, I'm imagining the groups that, say, police officers have to go to when they fire their gun, or
the
and
same thing. Oh my God!
That is
yes.
Very
Hell
interesting.
yes.
Like, that's actually something I had never even considered, because you're right. This is, if we can start thinking empathy outward, as opposed to, coming from a place of judgment, it would do a wealth of good for people. And think about all of the people who would potentially see a provider who would not. I also think of it from that perspective. People who are either lonely or, it sounds very crass, but there are people, there's the oldest joke in the book is, oh, Bob's grumpy. Guess his wife's not giving it up. That's the oldest trick in the book. But the flip side of that is they also have, Susie's real uptight. She needs a real deep dicking, or whatever. Sex calms people down and makes them generally easier to be around. I know that to every hammer, every problem looks like a nail, but there are people that I see who are full of anger, and you don't have to go far on the internet to find them. And sometimes you'd go, God, I know just the provider who would put a smile on your face. And then maybe you won't be, leaving YouTube comments at 2:30 in the morning. It's just so bad that we just want to bring a little joy into the world by way of orgasms. And if people thought of it more like that, like drug dealers, you stop. it started with weed, and this is, I think, where it's going to go, because now I walk into a dispensary and these people aren't called drug dealers, they're called bud tenders. They're called cannabis experts. You know,
Oh, really?
do you know what I like? So, like, and granted, I'm in California, so there's a little bit of we're at the vanguard of it, but I don't see why we can't get to that place with sex work. That we will have a concierge at the front, and it'll be, oh, what are you into? You're into feet, and you're into naval role play. Well, what do you know? Wait, big feet or little feet? Little feet? Okay, never mind. Rhonda, go back. We need Juliet. Juliet comes out in a little sailor suit and tiny little feet, and it just makes people so. It's so we have. I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tear here, but like in 2021, the biggest asset that every single company is trying to shove down our throats is the fallacy of customization. Every fucking Spotify has an algorithm, and every week gives you a playlist of music it knows you're going to like. You fill out this 30 questionnaire, and you're going to get shampoo that's perfect for you, perfect for your zip code. You're going to get some specialized face care. You know, it's customization algorithms, and the idea that the two new luxury assets of 2021 is this was curated just for me because we all feel special then, and this is just for me, and privacy. So like privacy, maybe less so in the time of COVID because we've now been like privacied out. And we miss some connection. But the idea of having one's own space and having something perfectly curated for you, even though it normally isn't, because most people, like, you're not as unique as you think you are. People are unique. People are wonderfully unique. But at your core, like, if you like pavement, you're probably going to like Neutral Milk Hotel. To segue into music. But I don't see why that is not just the biggest money-making opportunity. And if we had people who were cozying up to lobbyists in Colorado and California and, Virginia, that as soon as the legislation goes through that legalizes marijuana, these grows are just overnight, these legitimate grows and warehouses of hydroponic weed up the assholes, just like they just magically existed. No. Like it's so simple. It's now step by step lined up for us to do it for sex work. And it would be so cool. You could go to a place, you can walk in, imagine if you will, a building where you walk in the door and you get to, you're matched with somebody who likes your interests. You get to pay contactless pay. Hell, pay Bitcoin. I don't care, but Bitcoin just kind of freaks me out because like it's now so big, people forget, what Bitcoin was created for, which is like buying drugs and people. So
yeah,
not to bring the energy down. But crypto weirds me out because it's phantom money, and I don't know how something that's named after a meme can like suddenly have value in the world. But that's why I carry a lot of cash because I need to I'm a tangible. But I say this because imagine if you could walk into a room, you find a provider, you really hit it off with them. They know who you are. Then suddenly it's like your corner bar where they're like, oh, Al, I'll make you your vodka sidecar like you do. You can walk out of that building and on your way out, get like a loyalty card. You can get tested for STDs because the providers are tested weekly. Like
it's great.
It's so great. And that just makes me sad to think about because you're like, it would be so easy. It would be great. Next thing you know, I don't, so, but we can dream. We can dream and we can make it happen.
We can make it happen. That's the important part. Yeah, because I think whatever that's on the way, like, I think there is enough people. I think this is also a thought that I have a lot that disturbs me a little bit, which is, if we go out and ask the world how many people are uncomfortable about the fact that sex work is working the way it is right now, probably most of the people are going to say, I'm not. But the amount of people that do something about it, who are willing to do something about it, is considerably smaller.
Yeah, no, if you were to ask everybody on the street, are pimps bad? They go, yeah, pimps are bad. Pimps are pretty bad. What if I told you there was a way we could get rid of pimps? What if there was a way that I told you we could get rid of like rampant abuse of sometimes non-U.S. citizens and underage people? Oh, I'm sorry. You have to go and vote on that? Oh, God, how inconvenient for you. It's absurd. But this is kind of, I think, a turning point where last year in particular, people got really sick of a lot of talk and no action. So it fills me with hope that people are going to stop being, keyboard. I hate this term, but keyboard warriors, as opposed to actually trying to, advocate for change and walking the walk, as opposed to just saying pimps are bad. They don't say that. Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of so many things right now. One of them is because that's so important. The story, for example, of Mia Khalifa, and how she mentions how she was young when she got into the industry, and she really didn't know what that was going to entail for her in the long run. Mm-hmm. And like if all of that, everything that you're picturing existed, things would probably be very different, probably for her too. And then on the flip side of the clients, I think it would come also with, it would be revolutionary, because as you're saying, sex makes people happy, like chemically does. Like, we're not inventing this. It's really, science says that. And then the many stories of people, like you were mentioning just that one, like, yeah, he's grumpy, maybe his wife, whatever. And then the many stories of, for example, young women who also feel like, they want to explore this world, like the world of sex or whatever. But then it ends up that in itself allows for a lot of abusive relationships to happen, things like that. But if you could just go and pursue sex and explore it like that, and just
also make money. Like I'm sure everybody who would watch or listen knows at least one person who goes, "Ugh, yeah, I waited tables for like 3 weeks, never again." Or, "I'm not working retail anymore." That really, imagine a lot of particularly college-aged women, which, as you're right, is a time that mostly culturally we understand that's when, like, women explore their sexuality, because it can't be in high school. That's when they're, never mind. I'm not touching that. But like, I don't know how many conversations I had during college with women who are going, "Oh my God, I really like sex, but I feel like I'm a slut because I really like sex." And I'm like, this is the problem of the world, is that how can we, from such an early age and from such a broad cultural place, take something that chemically feels good, and by no fault of our own, sometimes by no fault of the partner or anything, you feel bad for liking it. That's just a weird endemic, like a systemic shame that we've ground into people. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, as opposed to, like, the girl I know who was a Christmas elf at Macy's for 3 years in a row. And she was like, "Yeah, it's not the best job, but my God, that holiday money is amazing. So I did it 3 years in a row." Imagine people talking about sex work in that same way of, "Yeah, I did it through college, and it helped me pay off my student loans, and I got really, really good at blowjobs. So there's that." Like, every job that you do,
and that's a life skill.
And that's a life skill. That's what I mean. Like, I don't throw around the term tug job artist lightly. Like, it's a skill. I don't like most of the work I've had, but you learn things from it. And if we start looking at sexuality across the board as something that is not so private and something that is just human, I really think that we will. It leads itself to a sense of emotional intelligence. Like, I'm not saying
Totally.
we have to, because it's not, it's incremental. And I think it's just a shift about sex, because we can't make it about monogamy and we can't make it about something else, because those are really like tied up moralistic issues. And that is not for me to tackle. It's more just, can we just, it's just sex. Sex makes people good. Sex makes people feel good. Like, just think about pleasure, and how cool is that? And it shouldn't be as like seismic of a shift as it is, but baby steps.
Yeah, you're right. And also, I think what you said made me think of how that would also change our perception about people, because many people, and especially when there are these ideas of power and these weird, wicked ideas about stuff, humans end up being objectified, not only women, but humans in general. Like, people walk in relationships like, oh, I want somebody who does this, 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 and that. And like, are you looking at the person that's behind that, Yeah. Like, so, and I think when you, I guess this would also allow for that to be, like separated, like you can pursue your own sexual pleasure, and you can also empower yourself in the fact that you can get it yourself. Like, you could just go pay for it. I want this, I have this fantasy, and I want to make it happen. I'm going to go pay for it. And that you're in a safe space, that if somebody cuts you, you're not going to go to jail because you were living, a fantasy that you had. So I think it would also kind of shift a little bit the way we see humans, because then it wouldn't be like, because what tends to happen sometimes, I've seen this in my life actually around me, is that people like just get fixated with like, this person has to give me that, but then that person is not compatible with that, you know what I mean?
That is a very, that's a really, really great point. And I don't see how I keep thinking about like the people who, I mean, I love that, but I also keep thinking about, I was on Tinder for the briefest of time just to meet my partner. We've been together for 3 years, so it worked. Yeah, he's the sweetest. But folks who have like no guys under 6 foot, like, all right, but you can't have a problem when there is that would be perfect for someone who walks into the gigolo factory and says, I don't want any guys under 6 foot. But maybe that person is missing out on their soulmate or their perfect husband. Exactly. When in fact, they just want to fuck a tall guy. Like, and maybe if they get that out of their system, and that's that, of all the things I've said, that's what makes me blush. Of all the things, it's they get it out of their system, and they're like, oh, okay, now I would like someone who can help provide for me and my children. Like, but yeah, it's oh my God, I don't know how many times you've seen. I mean, there are jokes that there are couples who are only together because of one of their proclivities. I had a cousin, and the joke was always that he would bring home very heavy set women, and they would be like, man, he dates the bitchiest women because he likes fat bitches. And I was like, excuse me? And they're like, no, that's his thing. Like, he is a bona fide chubby chaser. He loves his heavy set women, and he really likes it when they're mean to him. And I was like, well, that cousin has clearly got something that enough people fit in the bandwidth that, like, he's never going to run out of people to date. Good for him. Like, that's. But what if it was just in the bedroom? And that's an interesting thing, because sometimes things work in the bedroom that do not work in real life.
That is totally true.
I narrate audiobooks that's my main job now. My primary source of income is I narrate a lot of romance books. And they're absurd because they're not real people. They're fantasies.
They're fabricated. They are tailored made for people's fantasies.
Yeah, they're always like 6'4", hairless, they have rippling pectorals. They're self-deprecating, but they don't talk about their job because their job is like they're a billionaire. They always have so much money.
This is giving me 50 Shades of Grey vibes.
I know. Well, which is so frustrating because I had to read a few chapters of that book so that I could tear it apart, because I was like, I won't bitch about this book unless I know what I'm complaining about. And it was some of the most painful reading I've ever had to do.
And the movies have a lot of issues when it comes to consent, like a shit ton of them. Like,
yeah, I won't watch them. I won't watch them because that is a big bugbear for me in terms of like making BDSM too erotic and sexy, where like more often than not, I laughed more often in sessions than I didn't, because sex is funny. It's weird body parts doing weird things, and it's comical. And if you can't laugh at it,
I love that description so much.
It's just weird body parts. We can do weird things, sometimes making weird sounds. And if you can't laugh at it, well then I don't know what your problem is, because that's part of the joy. So when you take something like 50 Shades of Grey and you make it so ponderous and like it's so taboo and so sexy, and you like run away. I don't know, man. Honestly, if every sexual encounter was that like charged and illicit, I'd be exhausting. It's exhausting. Sometimes you just want to like walk into a room wearing just a bra and be like, hey, you know what?
Are you in the mood for? Are you
Let's
too busy?
Wrestle. That's what I have to do, because I have a higher sex drive than my partner. So I basically have to just like check in with him early in the day and go, anytime you want today, just hit me up. Just letting you know it's on my mind. So pretty please. And for a while, but you feel really, it also feels really weird for a lot of women to ask for sex. Like they don't want to ask for sex because they're not supposed to want it. But at the same time, a lot of guys go, well, especially now that the dialogue is changing, I've met a lot of younger men, say men under 30, who don't know how to navigate unless the woman is very assertive. And so now we're stuck in an interesting place where the consent dialogue is now so strong that there are men going, I can't even approach a woman because if she thinks I'm not attractive, I'm a creep because I've asked to buy her a drink. And I go, well, that's not the same thing as catcalling her, but I understand why you might be uncomfortable. And then a girl goes, but a guy's supposed to ask me and supposed to initiate. Well, okay, well, which way do you fucking want it? Do you want to be treated like an equal? Or do you want to be treated like a princess? Or do you,
I love that. Yes. Do you want to be treated like an equal, or do you want to be treated like a princess? That is some serious food for thought.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I also like being treated like a princess, but also but only usually after I'm treated like a dirty whore. But it's helpful, and also like you need to get consent from somebody before you put your expectations on them. You know, it's part of the most beautiful thing is that if you ever go to a BDSM club, you'll see these printouts of like yes, no, and maybe lists. Half the reason I'm such an advocate for BDSM is because everything that makes up a positive BDSM scene and a positive BDSM relationship is just good practices for normal relationship. And I think there is not a vanilla couple in the world, gay, straight, indifferent, that would not benefit from sitting down with their partner and going, what words do you like me to use to talk about your cock? Do you like cock? Do you like dick? Do you like penis? Cool. Now I know which one you like. Is it okay if I do this? Oh, that's actually not very exciting for you? Cool. Well, then do on my hand what you'd like me to do to your clit. Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's really great. So should not call you a slut. Very good. Because it's baked in to a beneficial BDSM scene of open communication and the ability to pull a ripcord at any moment in time. there's such an extra level of connection and communication that's required that a lot of people, I think, get bogged down on. And because it doesn't make for a very sexy scene, that's why that scene's not in 50 Shades of Grey. Because it's administrative. It's boring. It's the legwork and the upkeep that people go, well, I don't want to do that. I want to meet someone at a bar and then make out with them in the bathroom and then go back to my place and just have doggy style. And that's what you'll get for the rest of your life until you up your fucking game. Like, that, you're like, that's it. That's all you're ever going to get. And everyone's just got to, like, just show up. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like do the work as you do it everywhere else.
Work. Exactly. You wouldn't show up in a t-shirt and boxers to a job interview. So like when you get to that point with a person who's a potential sexual partner, I love treating it like a research project. But I'm a puzzle solver, so I'm like, what is it? What's your thing? What's your thing? What can I do? What can I do to blow your mind? But there are so many conversations that get tangled up in, God forbid I mention, well, a former partner of mine used to do this, because then you'll trigger a jealousy reaction, or there's such a weird stigma of, you can't have preferences because that means that you've already had enough sex to know what you like. That's not how that works.
And they can shift.
They can shift. They can change over time. My God, when I look at the boys that I oh God, there was a period of 2 years where I consistently attracted Eagle Scouts. I didn't look for Eagle Scouts. I just mean everyone that I went out with in like a 2-year period all happened to be Eagle Scouts, and I don't know how I attracted them because I corrupted all of them. I corrupted them. but yeah, no,
it
nice
was your
guys.
mission.
It was my mission in life. I'm a sex Sherpa. That is what my boyfriend will call me. He was such a little vanilla boy when I got a hold of him, and I just a whole new world.
That feels good. But that's a good feeling. I think, and different, probably.
And then you hook them. That's how you hook them. And they're like, you'll let me do what? You'll do what to me? Oh my God. I will never leave. I will never leave you. And then I know I hit the lottery. Not every partner is like that, but being good at sex is one of the best ways to like keep a happy relationship. There's nobody in the world who can't benefit. That's I'm not going to say no, because we have ace and aromantic folks out there. But for all those pursuing sexual relationships, being bad at sex helps nobody.
And I think more than being good, probably just worrying about communicating and learning, because probably you'll never be as good as you could be. But if you approach it with that learning mindset, it's going to work. So I think I love that word so much. So I think being mindful of time, I think I would like to close with one question, which would be for anybody listening, probably they wouldn't be listening to this, but if they do not agree with sex work by any means, or if they are unsure, maybe they're trying to change their perception, what would you tell them? And like, I guess this question goes directed to what needs to change in individually in each of us for the world of sex work to be different, and for people who are sex workers to be safer and to thrive in their profession.
I would say that the number one paradigm shift would be to put sex and intimacy back into the hierarchy of needs with food and shelter and education. If you're traveling on a dark night and you find a motel that's open, you are so welcome. They have so given your life something that you need, and you want to pay them for that room for the night. If you are lonely, or you are anxious, or you have blue balls and you find somebody who has lifted that burden for you, or you are a widow and you just would like to, break off some steam with a hot piece of man meat, you want to thank that person, and there just shouldn't there. I don't see, I would ask an individual who is against sex work, uh, like, who hurt you? It's a bit of a meme, but like, who hurt you? And why do you not want to reward putting more happiness in the world? And I wish it didn't sound that hokey, but it almost is that simple. Is if you can change sex from something that you're ashamed of to something that you're proud of, something that you need, like you need food and water, well, then suddenly you think that, Sasha Grey is as amazing as Gordon Ramsay because they both make things that you enjoy. Gordon Ramsay, famed restaurateur. Sasha Grey takes it in the keister like a champ. They're both amazing people.
I love it.
Thanks for putting me on the spot because I love.
We have to. What we did here was enjoying you. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me and for with us today. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing your experiences, and thank you for being just this lovely, funny person that puts everything into simple words. So just for tying it up a little bit for the listeners, just thank you for being here, and remember that sex education, empowerment are vehicles for peace. The more we know ourselves, the more we understand ourselves sexually, the more we can be at peace with ourselves, understand others, and just create a better world. And hopefully that will happen one day.
I'm with you, Diana. Thank you so much for having me. It's truly been a pleasure.
Thank you.